This ping cost $30,000, helped eliminate a team from Worlds, and was just the tip of the iceberg in what might actually be the most chaotic and controversial tournament in League history, which at the time was being played for the biggest prize pool esports had ever seen. But in order to understand how this single click of a mouse ended up costing more money than some players' entire contracts, and how the tournament got to the point where Riot was literally giving out free pizza and merch so that fans would leave, we'll first need to understand just how flawless League's first real world championship needed to be so that this upcoming esport could actually survive. You see, just a year before in 2011, Riot had hosted League's first ever World Championship during November's DreamHack event in Sweden in front of a crowd of about 200 people, with 8 teams battling it out for a cash prize of $100,000, and half of this prize pool eventually going to the 3-day tournament's eventual winners, Fnatic. Especially since League had only been released just 2 years prior, the success of this early event led to Riot announcing some pretty major plans for the game's esports scene in the following year, including prized events, a competitive circuit for each of the major regions, and most importantly, the return of League's World Championship, this time with a much larger prize pool and an actual trophy. Now, even though each region's competitive scene has a full season's worth of stories to tell on their own, to make a long story short, after roughly 10 months of competition, these were the 12 teams that would ultimately qualify for Season 2's World Championship, with 2 teams from China, 2 from Korea, 3 from Europe, another 3 from North America, and 1 team each from Taiwan and Southeast Asia. I know, truly crazy times these were when it came to regional representation. But hey, at least for this time around, North America didn't need to worry about any airports since the tournament took place at the LA Live venue in Los Angeles, California, setting the players in front of a crowd of a couple hundred people while hundreds of thousands tuned in from around the world online throughout the tournament's opening group stage. For the first couple of days, the tournament actually went pretty smoothly as a whole, with Riot showing that they could draw in big names and an even bigger turnout for this up-and-coming esports scene. And due to the tournament's short time span of only 10 days from start to finish, things got brutal incredibly quickly. By the end of the tournament's 12 hours straight of a group stage, a total of 4 teams were eliminated from competition over the course of 12 best of ones, with these matches already providing the tournament with some pretty hype moments, including CLG Prime's legendary triple teleport backdoor, which sealed the fate of European second seed SK.
Now we're seeing Voivod teleporting, they're going into the base, CLG are pushing into the base, Voivod's got the final nexus to it, they're going to try and catch up towards Aranea, have they got the damage? Voivod's taking it, the second teleport comes in, big penalty, Oriana ultimate, the nexus is exposed, and someone is just going to take the nexus down, no, Kevin gets in there, absolutely obliterates him, but Voivod drives him back, and it's won it, I do not believe the game, what an absolute epic.
With the bracket stage now set to determine who would be the first team ever to lift the Summoners Cup, the tournament seemed to be, once again, going all as planned. Well, that is until the quarterfinals, where basically everything that could go wrong ended up doing exactly that. In fact, 2 of the biggest controversies in Worlds history, even to this day, both came from this single series of quarterfinal matches. So to start off, let's first go back to that ping we talked about earlier, because you might be wondering how a single click of the mouse could cost anyone the equivalent of 1 month's rent in New York City. As we already know, the first part of this year's Worlds took place in an outdoor venue with a stage, announcer booths, and these really sick rotating platforms for the players to come out on. And while this was all well and good, there was a problem with the way the stage was structured, particularly with the placement of the crowd's overhead screens. Now, when you take a look at most major events today, players are often seen underneath giant mounted screens, or even sit behind them altogether, and the reasoning for that very likely came from this day of matches and the lack of consideration that if you put a giant screen behind the players, well, it would be really easy to cheat off of. Since it's a bit hard to tell from the event's head-on camera perspective, I made this rough visual to kind of show how the players were positioned compared to the layout of the stage. And as you can see, if a player looked far enough to their left or right, they would be able to easily see the full vision provided by the camera spectating the match. And in addition to the giant screen of gameplay behind them, there were literally dedicated minimap screens on both sides of the stage as well, which I mean, yeah, it does kind of feel like they were asking for it. But even despite Riot's best attempts to try and avoid this issue by telling the players that they had to face forwards at all times, during the quarterfinals things began to really unravel, as a single clear instance of cheating exposed several other players who had already screen peeked in previous days without anyone noticing, with this sneaky attempt being spotted in the first game of Azubu Frost quarterfinals against TSM. Being a best of 3 elimination match between Korea and North America's first seeds, the pressure of this high stakes series was massive, and literally 15 seconds into the first game, Azubu Frost's ADC Gwamm began to crack. You see, TSM tried to start off the series with a bit of a top brush surprise by sending all 5 players top lane in hopes of collecting a quick kill, only to be caught by Shy's Jace, who had sent out a shock blast to spot the play, which seems like it was just a lucky predictive read until you watch back the tape. As you can see, just after TSM leaves their base, a ping goes down onto what should have been complete darkness to Azubu Frost, and if you watch the player cams, it's pretty easy to see where the idea for this seemingly random ping may have come from. Though obviously this screen peek in of itself wasn't necessarily series defining, it did identify a secret strategy by TSM in a way that was unfair and probably wouldn't have been so easy to figure out had there not been cheating, ultimately helping Azubu Frost eliminate TSM from Worlds in a 2-0 series and creating a storm of understandable controversy. And while there was even more chaos after this cheating scandal due to an entirely different issue that we'll cover in just a moment, for the time being the hunt was on for both the viewers and Riot to search through all previous footage and try to identify any other potential instances of this cheating, which as you may have guessed, they actually did find. In IG vs SK Gaming's group stage match, IG's mid laner Zatai took a very clear look over his right shoulder during a pause to determine if he was safe to face check a bush, only receiving a warning due to the lack of meaningful impact that this cheating had. Though Azubu Frost would end up being fined a massive $30,000 for Wong's actions due to the impact that they had on the game, TSM's top laner Dyrus was actually spotted screen peeking as well in the same series, though he would only receive a warning due to the game that he did it in being remade. During the quarterfinals following the Azubu Frost vs TSM series, TPA's top laner Stanley looked left then adjusted his monitor in a way that at first seemed suspicious, but was ultimately dismissed due to it seeming as if it was related to sunlight glare, and TPA already had full vision of Najin's team as well. And as for the final game of CLG EU series against Team WE's bot laner Wei Zhao took a very blatant look at the screen as well, and though this screen peek may have actually provided some useful information to the player, it wasn't deemed significant enough for anything more than a warning. But while a player cheating would normally be the most outrageous story about a series, in the case of CLG vs WE, there was a much larger controversy at hand that featured what is probably the biggest technical blunder in League's history. Now, for starters, this was supposed to be the schedule for the tournament, with a 12-game marathon on day 1, 3 of the 4 quarterfinals matches on day 2, and the last quarterfinals match taking place on day 3, with the semifinals also happening later that same day. But there's a reason I specifically said the words "supposed to," and let me explain why. After 18 games had been played over the course of World's first 2 days, poor screen placement issues aside, the production side of things had been going amazingly, with great viewership, an energized crowd, and a cool venue, which I touched on previously. And things were still going as planned headed into the second game of the tournament's last quarterfinal as well, with WE being up 1-0 and already having a respectable lead after just 12 minutes, looking to secure their spot in the semifinal. Yeah, the internet of the venue went out and disconnected everyone, and since the game still had a decent amount to go, it was remade, which really sucks for WE's advantage, but hey, at least things were fixed so they could play the game as intended, and after a painfully slow 55-minute match, CLG actually managed to bring the series to a decisive Game 3, where after a literal hour of even more boring gameplay, the series would come down to this one team fight.
Ward's trying back on the way. Clearlove's going to dive in. They are going to go for this fight. Clearlove getting actually beast.
It happened again. The internet cut out, and 25 minutes into the remake of this match, it would happen another time. In fact, the venue's internet would cut out several more times throughout the day and into the night, meaning that this series ended up taking roughly 9 hours of broadcast time before it and all the games that were supposed to be after it had to be moved where the finals were being set up for a few days later, without fans or really much of a stage. Now, to give credit where it's due, Riot did actually handle the situation pretty well for those in the audience by giving out free merch, pizza, and trying their best to keep them entertained throughout this incredibly tiring and very long day for everyone there. But if you were watching from home, you likely became way too familiar with a certain song called Silver Scrapes, which played over and over again during these technical pauses to the point that it is still played in remembrance each time a League series goes to a Game 5. So even though this early Worlds was more chaotic than originally planned, at least some good came out of it with memes made and lessons learned that shape League's esports community even to this very day. I'd really appreciate if you considered subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, since you seem to enjoy this video. You can always change your mind later, but yeah, that being said, hope you guys have a great rest of your day or night. As always, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Later!